Welcome to the Common Geeking Program, a book club podcast for nerd culture where each episode 3 of us read up on a topic, then discuss it from geeky, nerdy perspectives. This week, I'm your host, Edward Ryan, and we'll be discussing Ready Player One and the representation of virtual spaces in media. I'm joined this week by...
Hi, I'm Jeff, and this week I'm going to be talking about the incredible 2003 movie Spy Kids 3D Game Over.
And
I am Jahnavi, and you know what? I'm going to go classic with this one. I'm just going to straight up talk about The Matrix.
Oh, right on.
Yeah.
We're going to start by summarizing... No, that's so clunky. I'm not going to say it like that.
The shade.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to rewrite the script.
Well, stuff is going to change, you know?
Time. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll get started by summarizing the topic in domains, and then we'll move into a more open discussion. And finally, we'll close with our rating section and determine who contributed best to today's topic. Transition.
At first, when we were introducing ourselves, and you were like, and, so that Jahnavi could go in, my mind was like, and what? I said all the shit I was supposed to say.
Wow, Jeff.
And then I'm like, oh, right.
That
Jahnavi
narcissism. My goodness. Do I not matter anymore?
Okay.
Not until you
All
give me
right,
part of
so
that
let's
bagel.
get going with this summary. Let me look at the chronograph to make sure I'm keeping us on time.
Do it.
Oh shit, Jeff did it before I could. Or Jahnavi did. I actually don't know. It just sounded like Jeff did it. Alright, no one's going to answer. That's fine. I'll just do the thing. Alright, so let's get going with this summary.
Wait a
So the
minute.
topic
What the
I
fuck?
brought for us to discuss today is the film Ready Player One. It's based off the book by Ernest Cline. But today we're going to be talking about the film because the main thing we're discussing in this episode is how different media represents visually virtual spaces. So for those of you who are not aware, Ready Player One takes place in the future where people's lives have pretty much take place entirely in this virtual reality space called the Oasis.
The far too near future, I think.
Yeah. That's
I don't know. That's like some 2001 shit right there. What year? It's like 2045.
It's like
2049
or something like that.
Yeah. I'm just like you
Not
really
too
okay.
distant
Like
future.
I don't even think that it's I don't even think it's necessarily that far of a stretch to say that technology could exist, but that like all of the architecture in all the cities.
Oh, it's 2044.
But like all the architecture in the cities and everything would just be like stacks of garbage in 20 years. I don't think we'd still be using buildings by that point.
So let's talk
right?
about that, right? So one of the big things going on in the world building of it is there's huge issues with like overpopulation. So they've started creating these like huge, like crazy, unsafe, like stack, housings. I think he kind of goes over it very I think it's like one line in the opening monologue. They go over it more in the book, but it's definitely referenced in the film, obviously visually. But so in this world, people spend most of their time, they do a lot of their jobs, and they spend a lot of their free time in this virtual reality space called the Oasis. It's like a fully immersive virtual world, and there's a lot of different ways that people can hook up to it. You can have, I think like minimum is you have a set of goggles and a pair of gloves that you interact with the Oasis with.
Which is like hella dangerous, I just want to say. Unless there's like a mode where you can walk forward without walking. That scene when like...
Well, so, okay, we'll talk about that later. I want to push forward with the summary, and then we'll discuss that stuff. So, no, I think because when Wade plugs in with just his gloves and goggles, he's sitting in a chair. So there's clearly some kind of control in the gloves. When you don't have other kind of pieces hooked up where you can walk, I don't know what that is because the technology is clearly more advanced than current virtual reality technology. So something that's the simplest form, but then they also have like these kind of like, rigs where you are moving around fully in the real world.
And it's got like a cool conveyor belt and shit like that.
Yeah, like
so that you're not physically moving, but
like an endless treadmill.
Yeah,
well, not treadmill's always endless. Like a 360-degree treadmill, which is a thing in the real world. But then they also wear these like full body suits so they can feel the stuff that happens to them, and like it's super immersive. I don't know that I'd want to feel the stuff, especially because there's like fighty parts. But
yeah, or like, you know, be able to turn that shit on and off.
Yeah.
Like you get the haptic sense, but like you don't feel getting stabbed if you get stabbed.
Yeah.
Or getting hit in the crotch. I don't know how that shit works.
Yeah.
Because like his suit just like glowed, but I'm like, but wouldn't it have to like really press to feel like you just
it's
got kicked in
probably
the
like
dick?
an electro stimuli or
Yeah.
something, you know?
But
I think I would turn that off on the user settings.
Okay, actually, let's
if I get hit in the dick,
let's talk
I
about
probably
this.
don't wanna...
Let's talk about this. Have you both used the Nintendo Switch?
I have.
A little bit. I've used it a little bit. Only for about like 5 minutes.
I don't know, Jeff, if you've played any games that utilize this feature, but the Nintendo Switch has a feature on the Joy-Cons. I can't remember what Nintendo calls it, but where it's this really like advanced like vibration that the controllers can do. To give you like a sort of like haptic feedback that you don't, you know, whereas other controllers, like it's like, oh, it vibrated, but like,
yeah, that's what it feels like when I use it, is it just vibrates.
So that could be like the games. So for example, there's the I can't remember what's the game called. There's like a thing that's like a bunch of mini games, right? And one of the things is you pick up the Joy-Con and you shake it
like
around.
The shit with the cardboard boxes?
Right, and no, it's not that one. But you pick up the Joy-Con and you shake it around, and the way that the vibration is, it feels like the Joy-Con has marbles rolling around in it, and you have to guess how many marbles are in it. And it literally feels like that. It's crazy, like how advanced it is.
It's probably the same shit that they use in like the Apple Watches.
Maybe
like Colin,
to do like
Colin
the
was
heartbeat
describing
and
it
stuff
as
like that. Yeah,
well, like when he gets a text or something, it like literally, he said it feels like someone's like tapping him on the wrist, you know.
Yeah,
and it's just like the haptic shit from his watch.
So you know, stuff like that, but 2044 instead of 2019.
Can we get into the plot of Ready Player One a little bit?
Do it. Did you want to start us off?
No.
All right, I'll do it. I'll start us off. So our main character is Wade Watts. He's a poor kid in Chicago.
Yeah, it's in Columbus,
Ohio. Okay, thank you very much.
And so is everything else, apparently. Everything.
So,
yeah, we got to give Columbus, Ohio its moment.
So let me go back. There's a little bit more world building to do for the plot.
Yeah.
So the guy who created the Oasis, one of the guys who created it, was a man named James Halliday, and he died. And when he died, he left. His will was this like challenge that he put into the Oasis, where he had this like riddle that needed to be solved, and there were like tasks that you had to find and complete, and they were basically Easter eggs in the game. And if you found and completed the tasks, all of them, and there's 3 keys that you have to get from completing the tasks. If you get all 3 keys, then you win the challenge, and you become the heir to his estate. So you get control over the Oasis, and you get a bunch of money, right? So that happened some time ago in this world. I think like 5 years ago, something like that.
I remember that it takes 5 years it took 5 years for anyone to solve the first challenge, which I thought was kind of ridiculous, given what the solution was.
Yeah,
but
so
that's how I remember
that. We can
People
talk
become
about
stupider in the future.
We can talk about that. That's something I have an issue with the adaptation, because the first challenge in the book. Well, it's not that no one solved it; it's that no one found it. So it's like.
Oh, okay. So like they didn't even find the race.
It's not a race in the book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
because that wouldn't go well on the page, really.
Yeah, I mean it might. I don't know. I've never read like a racing book.
There's probably a reason for that. There's probably not a lot of racing books because they're like.
What they could do is they could just Yeah, they could just use the letters.
There's gotta be like
to show on the page like where all the cars are. So you're actually just visually seeing it.
There's gotta
you,
be like
do a
grade
flip
school
book.
level books about NASCAR.
Yeah.
Right? Like
but they're
NASCAR
picture
Kid
books.
or something like that, you know?
But they're picture
No,
books.
I'm talking about like chapter books. You know, when they called them chapter books.
I forgot they called them that.
Yeah, when you were a kid, that's what they called them. And then you grew up and you realized that's just books.
That's just books, yo.
Not in my future. I want picture books to be the default.
That's probably why it's harder to solve these fucking challenges. Cause
I gotta push forward with this summary because we've got a lot of good content here, but I want the listeners to not be confused. So
too late.
I know. So anyway, in the film, Wade ends up solving the first challenge, and then there's a whole adventure where he has friends and there's villains and stuff like that. It's not super relevant to the topic I want to talk about today, but they solve all these challenges and stuff in the Oasis, and most of the film takes place in the Oasis, right? And they go in there, and what I want to talk about today is how they kind of create that virtual space and represent it on screen. Maybe compare and contrast it with the other other topics that people brought today. So in Ready Player One, first of all, what we see in the film is everyone, has like an avatar, like in any kind of video game or virtual reality, or not sorry, virtual reality, but any like video game or The Sims or Second Life or whatever, right? You have an avatar that you play as. And they can change the appearance of the avatar at will, but there is an element of like they need like in-game currency to do so,
to like buy certain stuff.
Yeah. And there's lots of like different like licensed characters and stuff. Like you see Tracer from Overwatch and
a bunch.
Yeah. And you see I think like a couple Street Fighter characters. And a few things, the Ninja Turtles, Iron Giant. So there's a whole bunch of stuff like that in the film. But so the way that like they kind of represent the Oasis is very trying to put my thoughts together. The way they represent it is very kind of like crowded and chaotic, but in a positive way, which really contrasts like the real world setting of the film, which is really crowded and chaotic in a negative way. Like it's all these people in all these places. Like, so there's a planet that's like a volcano planet, and it's just got a bunch of volcanoes that are always erupting. And there's like a water slide planet and stuff like that. And then there's these like hub worlds, which have a whole bunch of different things going on them. Like there's shops and museums and movie theaters and stuff like that. So it's because in Ready Player One, the virtual reality stuff is so like advanced that people kind of live their lives in there. It's like a hyper version of reality rather than being this like weird separate space. I mean, it is a weird separate space, but they have all this stuff that you would have in the real world in there.
Yeah, it's kind of like on one side of your world coin, you have this like, this is approaching dystopia. And on the other side, you have like, but this is approaching utopia, where no one has any like, there's not really a resource problem because everything is virtual.
Exactly.
Except for the ones that are designed for like game purposes.
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? Yeah. Is there's an element of like gaming to the Oasis. And then there's also an element of like a life simulator to it.
Right. And I think like, I don't know, usually I think when virtual reality stuff is represented, like I what I like about Ready Player One is that like since they in the canon of this, right, like you can just make your avatar whatever, right? I think it's smart that they chose to like have a bunch of people just be represented by like already well-known characters because
people would do that.
People would definitely do that if they had the option.
And not everyone's humans. There's fish people and mermaids and robots.
Right? Even in games like Minecraft or something, like people buy skins to look like other characters and shit like that.
Exactly.
And
No, I think you're right. The diversity of it and the fact that they included licensed properties and stuff. I think adds to the realism of the virtual space.
Yeah, because it's like, I don't know, it's pushing into this realm of like, oh yeah, this is definitely like a heavily commercialized thing, but society is kind of cool with that because it like suits them, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, everyone's part of this like big fucking walking advertisement, but like, you know,
yeah,
so are we.
No, and that goes to like, I think a lot of the themes that are going on. Some of them are very blatant. But I think that's going to draw our summary for Ready Player One to a close. We went like a minute over, but we also kind of started like a minute late. So I'm calling that Gucci, son. Next up on the docket, my friends, we are going to have Jeff and then Jahnavi summarize their domains as they're going to relate to our topic and theme today. So, Jeffrey, why don't you get us started? Tell me about Spy Kids 3D Game Over, the movie. I added the movie.
I watched this movie, not all of it, because I didn't have time right before recording, and I forgot how just, like, goddamn incredible this movie was, and how the creators give zero shits about, like, plot structure or things making sense. The entire thing is, like, basically just, like, I don't remember, like, how early on Spy Kids 3D was in terms of, like, when the 3D movie technology came out. But the entire movie is basically just like, look what we can do with 3D.
Oh, it's so
like,
great.
The movie.
It's like the perfect example of
like it really is
of that era of 3D. It's perfect.
Like, there's fucking sections in the movie where they straight up like have visual cues to tell you to put on your glasses. And the glasses that they put on in the movie straight up look like the ones that they gave you in the theater, like the paper ones.
Okay, no. But let's talk about that though, right? So,
yeah.
In the film, they go into the like virtual reality video game, right? And to do so, they got to put on these special glasses.
Yeah, these
right.
Like, dumb-looking glasses.
You're in the theater watching the movie. And for the 3D parts, they don't want you to wear the glasses the whole time because the whole movie's not 3D. Yeah. So there's parts in the movie where there's a complete break in the action, and like a dude comes on screen and this flashing text. It's like, put on your 3D glasses, kids.
Yeah. So in the edited version, just Spy Kids 3 Game Over, where you're not expected to have 3D glasses, that stuff is not in there. But there's still like scenes where like, you know, when they're coming out of the thing, right? Like, there's like a big animated gesture by the actor who's like greeting Junie as he comes out, where he like picks up the glasses and goes like, "Take them off," you know. So the movie, this is the third in the Spy Kids trilogy, about kids who are spies. The Cortezes, Junie and Carmen. Carmen? Is that her name? Yeah,
it is
Carmen
indeed.
Cortez. And this one, unlike the other two movies, is mostly about Junie. He is retired from the spy organization, the OSS, and now he's like on his own, and then they like bring him into the game. I know, it starts off with a fucking noir style scene.
He's like 13 and he's retired from the agency.
It's great. I think he's like 9 or something. But yeah, so then, you know, he has to go into this new game that he's been saving up his money to get, to save his sister, because it's surprise, the game master, who's played by, or the toy maker who's played by Sylvester Stallone, of course, has like, you know, gotten past all of his fucking, you know, game regulations and shit, and like, I don't know, just like
I thought
laws.
The toy maker made the game.
Yeah, he made the game. Well, so that we get into that later, but how it's presented is that, how it's presented is that he is this nefarious villain who made this game, and when kids put the goggles on, they actually can't take them off, so they're all trapped in the game.
It's kind of like Sword Art Online.
Yeah, it's kind of like Sword Art Online. And then if they die in the game, they maybe die in real life. I don't know. It's not super addressed. I'm pretty sure the only characters that actually die,
something happens.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the only characters who actually die in the game are spoilers, the guy played by Elijah Wood.
Oh my god, he's the best.
Yeah, he's there for like 5 seconds. It's great.
Elijah Wood just
like, the
walks into this
character.
movie and he's like, I'm level 99, don't worry about it. And then he gets fucking killed and it's amazing.
Yeah, so the movie gives zero shits.
Oh my gosh.
In terms of how it handles the visuals,
tell me
it's
about
all like 2003, like really, really bad CGI. I mean, good for the time, I'm sure, but like,
no, not at all.
There's, well, fair, but there. So like, basically, like, Junie is just fucking like green screened onto this virtual world. And like most of the characters are like wearing these wacky cyber suits and they're living in this virtual world. And then his grandpa comes in who's wearing like a suit to help him like walk around. But the suit is also CGI. So basically his head is just like floating around like with the CGI suit and not always like perfectly. Sometimes it just like shifts off a little bit. I'm just like, hey, what you doing with your neck there, grandpa?
But living his best virtual life.
Yeah, he is. But, like, a lot of the stuff is, like, super, like, shit just unnecessarily pops up at you in the screen to, like, advertise the 3D technology.
Yet?
So how would you say they represent the world of the game?
Honestly, like, I think that the way that it's represented makes a lot of sense. Like, it's really bright colors, and there's a lot of, like, really fantastical techie things going on. It's really unpopulated because the game hasn't officially come out yet.
They're like beta testing it, right?
Yeah, so the only people in there are beta testing. Did this come out before or after Sword Art Online? Because there's like just a ridiculous amount of
this is way before
similarities.
Sword Art Online. Actually,
Jesus
you know what?
Christ.
I don't know when the manga for Sword Art Online is. Let me check.
So someone was like,
It's
"Hey,
way
what if we
before
did
the
Spy
anime.
Kids 3D?"
Well,
but
if you
literally
want-
everyone was in love with the main character, and then that's Sword Art Online.
Well, if that's
Dude, the Sword Art Online manga came out in 2009.
Ooh, that's rough. Sword Art Online, what are you doing? You're just copying Spy Kids 3D.
Yeah, but I mean, the virtual reality thing, like, it goes back to like traditions of stories about wish fulfillment.
Yeah,
and then
that's
like
true.
dream worlds versus real life.
Mm-hmm.
And at least like in a literary or like storytelling way, like people being too attached to their dreams or like a dream from which you can't wake
Gross.
up is like, that's also a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it is. There are certain conventions, right? Like, there are ways in which Spy Kids 3D is really similar to Ready Player One, right? And, like, a lot of those conventions and the attitudes towards them and the overall message, and even some plot points, like, having a big race thing or whatever, right?
But because every film that came out after Spy Kids 3D was copying Spy Kids 3D.
Pretty much,
That's just a fact. Now we are getting into some analysis stuff.
Yeah, we can save it.
And and we are kind of at the end of the time for your summary, Jeffrey. So is there anything you feel you missed that you want to hit real quick?
No, I mean, it's like all the graphics are really video gamey, like even, not even for the technology of 2003, right? Like everything is really blocky and kind of low res. And I do think that like some of that was intentional.
Yeah, it's very gamey.
And, like,
they've got power ups and
which I think is like honestly pretty realistic in terms of like where we'd be with 3D with virtual reality. Is that like the people in there don't really match the setting, but it all is like it's still a game environment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's pretty much the gist of it.
And I think that would probably make people more comfortable, right? Like you wouldn't necessarily want seamless virtual reality unless it was like an escapism thing. But if you're playing a game, you'd like to know, okay, this is a game. I'm in a game.
Right. Like people still like 8-bit as like a style.
I think that that's a really intelligent point, and I think it fits in with Ready Player One as well. And it's a super smooth transition into the next domain.
Which is the good old Matrix. in which the virtual reality is the one we've been in all along, and real life is a lot more. And maybe
actually are, you know?
Yeah, and I chose it because I thought it was a good sort of counterpoint to people are not in a virtual reality because they are intentionally escaping from the world or entering into a game or going elsewhere. It's because it's just where they've always been, and only a few people manage to escape and see what the less chill real world is like, where a bunch of machines are farming human bodies for their bioelectricity and have created this simulated environment to keep them from getting too wild and crazy. And that environment just happens to match the environment of the mid-90s. So, because apparently this was the peak of human civilization, when they were the most doing okay before things started to go screwy and they fought with the machines, and the machines won and enslaved them.
To be fair.
Also, part of the implication was that it was a time period that's really easy for the minds of the human, plants to accept that that's the time period they live in.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, having now lived in the late 2000 teens, I can confirm that the 90s is certainly a more palpable time than the way we're currently
Right. It's getting a little bit too real, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think I pretty much summed up the main things about The Matrix. It follows Neo, who is, kind of the chosen person who's supposed to help liberate a bunch of people. And he is to be the one to kind of liberate the human race from the machines.
God, could you imagine if Elijah Wood played Neo?
That would have been amazing.
Matrix reboot.
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm going to go into a little bit of a tangent here, but you know how they have fantasy football and stuff? You should just have fantasy movie casts for your favorite movies, and then just be
that's such a good idea.
I want all Nick Cage and everything.
Jahnavi, you could make an app out of this. That's such a good idea.
How do they compete? How do you get the stats?
Well, I mean, mostly it's just that you get to pick a few key scenes, and then you have to sort of you get a test
Nick Cage
audience
to act in them.
Yeah, you need a test audience simulator is what you'd need. You get to pick your demographics. Maybe all Nick Cage everything would do really well with preteen boys. We just don't know.
It'd do well with me, I'll tell you that.
But anyway.
It could be a user-voted system where all of the different casts are submitted, and then the populace votes on which is the best.
Festivals based on this. It could be a groupthink, crowdsourced virtual reality in which you can be immersed in the movie worlds of your collective choosing.
And the winner gets funded to actually make a scene with said cast.
So the Matrix.
Yeah.
or maybe there's a quest involved and it's so Ready Player One.
So the Matrix.
But all of these things are kind of I think the thing that all of our topics sort of have in common is they are sort of hero's journeys of a sort. You are you're passing through a number of trials, and then in Neo's case, he discovers his true potential as the ability to
do everything,
do as he wants in the Matrix, and he's OP in that situation, that scenario. And then for the other ones, it's coming to a realization of why you still need the real world.
Yeah. I think this is really good stuff for the discussion section. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about how, and I know it's just the 90s, the late 90s, but tell me more about how they represent the virtual world in the Matrix. Because it's not just the late 90s. It's the late 90s as a computer program. So talk to me about that a little bit.
So the computer programness, as depicted from the outside, is just a bunch of green code going up and down on a screen. And with the impression that this is what the machines are sort of like, this is the code for the environment. Yeah, like the code for the environment is just like the same as any other kind of code. Like, and the way that you enter into the Matrix is really quite visceral. You have like various touch points on your body that like things are sort of shoved into you.
And like then a jack in the back of their head.
Yeah, you're kind of strapped down. You do have the bonus of like being able to download kung fu and stuff into your brain, like straight in there.
That's something that they can do since they're outside of the Matrix.
Yeah,
because they know it's a computer program, right?
Yeah, because they have the awareness of that, and it's shown that Neo is like very talented at just being like accepting all of this knowledge like immediately. He doesn't need to. It doesn't take him as much time, or he's just better at accepting this nature of reality a little bit more than perhaps the average person is. So
let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So there's one part I don't know how recently you've seen The Matrix. There's the one part in the film where they talk about deja vu.
Indeed.
Do you want to discuss that at all?
Sure. So, deja vu is that feeling that, you know, you're re-experiencing something, or that something just happened, and that it's happening again. And for people in the Matrix, that sort of occurrence is the cue for something of there being a glitch in the Matrix somewhere, that someone's entering or exiting, or like reality is being sort of changed a little bit around you. And we
might be in the Matrix right now, and every time you experience deja vu, it's just because there was a little glitch in the program.
Yeah, in the world in the movie, which is like a schmancier and cooler effects version of the classic like brain in a vat thought experiment of like, what if we're not really having these experiences, dude? What if we're just brains being fed the experiences? Which has been sort of debated on and off through various centuries of philosophy. And now we make movies about it.
Yeah, it's like, oh shit, I can't remember who. It was like some philosopher or some bullshit.
Some philosopher, some bullshit, you know.
No, it's the quote about I dreamed I was a butterfly, and then I went to sleep and woke up as a man. Now I'm not sure if I'm dreaming I'm a man, if I'm a butterfly dreaming I'm a man, or if I'm awake and I was dreaming I was a butterfly. You know, I'll look up the quote.
Yeah, I was just gonna do that. Zhuangzi, Chuangzhou. Now I do not know whether I'm
gonna read it.
Yeah, it says that it's Zhuangzi. I don't know if I'm getting the tones right, but
I'm not. This gentleman said that he once dreamed of being a butterfly, and while he was in the dream, he felt he could flutter his wings and everything was real. But that on waking up, he realized that he was his name, and he was real. Then he thought and wondered which was really real. If he was his name, dreaming of being a butterfly, or if he was really a butterfly, dreaming of being his name.
Yeah. So it kind of like speaks to the relationship between yourself and your identity and the sensory experiences that you're having. And that's something that I think The Matrix does really well. It's sort of divorces the idea of somebody's personhood and their self from how they interact with the environment when the environment is stated to be fake, even though it feels real. And that in the world of The Matrix, it's just like everyone who's in, you know, Zion, which is the last sort of like vestige of humanity living outside of the clutches of the machines. You know, they're all about reality. They're clinging to the reality. They want liberation from the sort of like civilizational playpen the machines have put everyone else in. So that idea of like freedom and choice is very important. But in other virtual reality sort of like narratives, the escape world, the virtual reality world, is something that's sought after because it's like a step up, or like another more immersive way for people to distance themselves from what is real. And whether you want to like distance yourself from what is real, or whether you want to simply contemplate what reality is as far as how your experiences of it go. Just digging into some dream-based and like virtual reality-based stories is kind of like a good place to start as you ponder your way through your
Matrix existence.
As your Matrix existence.
And
yes.
that'll bring us to the end of the summary section, and we're gonna take a hop, skip, and a jump right on over to Domain Land. Transition. All right, so welcome to the discussion section. That's the section in which we have a discussion.
That checks out.
All right, so I kind of want to kick this off by just opening up the floor after the summaries.
To swallow us whole.
We're gonna fall through the floor.
Just fall through the floor. Fight it.
It's okay. We're butterflies. It's fine.
Anyway,
we'll live.
There's a butterfly in Spy Kids 3D.
Tell me about that, Jeffrey.
Full oval.
I actually do have things to say about that. I mean, like it's an interesting way that the virtual reality is represented.
So let me actually real quick though, so that there is a semblance of a through line for the editor. Let me finish the sentence I was doing, and then you'll do that.
We're very sorry.
So I want to kick things off by just kind of opening up the floor. I know there were things in the summary section that we wanted to discuss that we're going to hold off until now. I'm glad you guys are so rared up about the topic. So Jeffrey, did you want to start off talking about the butterflies?
Yeah, talking about a butterfly doesn't make any damn sense if it wasn't with that segue.
What segue?
God damn it. Deja vu. Have we done this before?
Wait a minute. How many times do we record this?
Deja vu.
I think I've been in this place before.
There hasn't been a butterfly around here in 25 years.
So there's a scene in Spy Kids that talks about some of the upsides to the virtual reality. Because like the advanced haptic suits in Ready Player One, they have suits so that you can feel things as if they're real. And there's a kind of confusing scene where Junie is shot onto the moon, and then his people from the outside, from OSS, the spy organization, contact him, and they're like, "Oh, you can like bring in a player from the real, you can bring in a person from the real world, right? To come help you." And then
and strangely, he doesn't pick John Cena.
He doesn't pick John Cena. Yeah, this was before the meme, so he probably didn't know who he was. So Junie picks his grandfather because he figures that since his grandfather has been paralyzed for years, that his arms and brain must be about as strong as 10 normal men or something like that.
I forgot about this.
Not just because he respects his grandfather's intelligence or anything, but
well, and his grandfather had history with the toy maker, right? Like,
but he didn't know that when he brought him in. That was a bit of a coincidence. Was just
more like a lucky convergence for Junie.
Well, it's unlucky.
Yeah. Well,
but, yeah. So the logic there is because his legs don't work, that his arms and brain must be stronger.
Must be stronger. Brain, maybe. He is an old man. I mean, he does have a wheelchair, so I guess there is some logic in his arms being stronger. Yeah. But he is also an old man.
It's
but
not like he's
enough about that logic.
Arms. He's not a gorilla.
It's not even just that he said that his brain and his arms must be stronger, is that he gave a fucking percentage at which they must be stronger, as if he'd done the math just now.
I mean,
according to my calculations, this is an order of magnitudes.
Well, okay, so anyway, he brings his grandfather on, and his grandfather just materializes there, and he's like, "Junie, where are we?" As if the situation was not explained to him beforehand, which makes me a little bit confused about how people are brought into the virtual world, because I thought it was with the glasses, and Junie's like watch or whatever that's showing like how much time he's been there.
Game? Like,
No, he's confused.
Because he explains it to her. He's really confused about how he's in virtual reality right now. He does get over it pretty quick.
People don't know how technology works joke.
Well, I think he was hanging out at home, and then suddenly he was zapped to do a VR game.
Yeah. Which is a little bit inconsistent.
He probably dies in the real world if he dies. Like, he didn't make this choice.
Yeah. Although, that being said, like, Junie is wearing, like, a watch, and it goes down, like, an hour, so maybe, like, OSS did contact him and, like, bring him into the game and explain very, very, very little to him before they did that. But either way, so then almost immediately, I think it's revealed later that the toy maker put it there, but there's like a mega legs power up that they give to the grandfather, so he can walk again, and he's wearing this like big fancy CGI suit, and then a butterfly shows up on the moon, which, like, whatever, it's virtual reality, so butterflies can be on the moon if you want, and he starts like chasing him around. But it's like the whole scene is sort of like representative, like, oh, the virtual reality is like giving the grandfather something because he can feel it, you know, because they established that you can feel things like they're real when you're in the game. He can now feel his legs and like move around
and jump,
which I think, and jump around, which they don't like really, you know, it's a kid's movie, so it's not like they really get into the implications of all that. But, you know, it's definitely there as like a message of like, oh, this technology has potential to actually be something real that exists for purpose in the world, you know? Which definitely, like, reminds me a lot of the stuff in Ready Player One, where it's like, the game basically exists by necessity, right? Like, it wasn't created as a solution to the overpopulation problem and all this, like, resource stuff, but
it became one.
It became that, right?
Or,
like, and there's really like a whole argument.
I guess it's more of like a Band-Aid, right?
Yeah, that's true, right?
We can't have that many civilizational problems if things are great here.
Yeah, and it's also like a thing where it's like, oh, but now society is neglecting getting rid of the real problem because of the Band-Aid that is like such a good temporary solution to, like a short-term solution.
It's like we're babysitting ourselves by putting ourselves in front of a TV, but on a very large scale.
Right, which I think is like, you know, that connects to the Matrix too, right? Because like there's the whole question of like, well, does it matter, right? Like we could just go back into the Matrix and live there, but at the end of the day, then like eventually
who does that?
Who does that? Yeah, but then at the end of the day,
get back into the Matrix.
Because
the society would end up crumbling because eventually, right, the robots would find a more efficient energy source. It's been a while since I've seen the Matrix. Like what? It's just that, like, oh, is it just a on principle thing? Like, we don't want to be human batteries, or like it's implied that like that's
rhetoric
it wouldn't
used
last
in the
forever,
movie
right?
seems to make it seem like a principle thing.
Okay.
Like we will not be slaves. Like we have to be free. Like
see, I always thought it was like the robots, like, you know, this is not like a permanent solution, right?
Well,
like that they would end up using. It
kind of is though, because if you remember in the lore. The sky was scorched. So like there's like a dense layer of, I don't know, nuclear
like
fallout of some kind.
Like poisonous for people.
So like there's no sun anymore.
Yeah.
Sure.
And like by keeping
I don't mean a permanent solution for the humans. I mean a permanent solution for the robots. Right.
No, but what I'm saying is like so like like it's possible eventually they could find a better like energy solution,
but that's not
the world has been like ravaged so much by like the war, and they have this like infinitely replenishable energy source.
Gotcha.
So it's like, I don't know that the film ever gets into that. It's an interesting topic, but in my recollection, at least the first
what's
Matrix
the practicality
doesn't talk about it.
Yeah,
it's more about like, just
the principle of them being slaves and batteries, basically.
It's now that I know I was sleeping, how can you go back? How can I go back? How can I stop being awake?
Yeah, and you get a little bit of like the Plato's cave thing with that. I hate to bring it up because it's
why do you hate to bring it up?
I don't know. It's just like a little bit of an abused subject. That's all. But But as far as the narrative of the movie goes, because we're sort of told it from like the human perspective, there is that sort of like, human bias towards the story. Because I'm sure the robots think that they're like, we could have just, not given you the virtual reality at all. Like, we could have just been like, all right, fine, but we're going to take you back to like the Dark Ages or something like that. Like, so it doesn't seem necessarily vindictive of the robots. It's just perhaps,
well, I thought it was to keep them like, because the 90s was like the most palpable, right?
Yeah. Because it's
not hard for them to actually get out of it once they know that they're in it, right?
Well,
I mean, it's hard for most
so like
people.
someone has to like. So I don't think they
there has to be some impetus to it.
I don't think they necessarily get into this, but I think there needs to be an outside influence for them to get out.
Okay.
But if they find out they're in it, and I think what the implication is that like their body rejects the.
Oh, okay.
And then I don't know, maybe they just die, because of the machines they're hooked up to or something. I really don't know because we don't see it happen. But no,
or that
we don't,
like eventually they would be able to get out, like if enough people knew about it.
Maybe, yeah. But it's
en masse.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic. Another thing, so in regards to Ready Player One, The Matrix, and
Spy Kids
3D, Game Over. So we have the two. So Ready Player One, the Oasis, the virtual world, and then Spy Kids 3D, the game world.
The game is called Game Over.
The game is called Game Over. Okay, the Game Over world. Pardon. They're both video games, right? Essentially, I know the Oasis is also like a life simulator and stuff like that, but they're both video games, whereas the Matrix is very much not a video game.
It's not a game.
But so it's interesting.
It'd be a pretty sick game though. But anyway.
I mean, there was like the Matrix Reloaded on PS2. That was a pretty dope game.
It is a pretty sick game, and we're experiencing it right now, Jahnavi. Like, the game that is the Matrix is what we're. And I'm not. This isn't even a joke about like, oh, we're actually in the Matrix right now. Like, the game of the Matrix is just life. Like, we're doing it.
No, Jeff, no, okay, because that's the late 90s.
You're right,
and it's 2019, so. This
the
is like
shitty
the
sequel of the game that
we have yet to fight with robots and destroy our planet.
Well, in the Matrix,
but that's not the game. That's
they do that outside of the Matrix.
Yeah.
And then they also later do it inside of the anyway. So what I was gonna say
in Spy
was
Kids 3D, they bring out like the tech into the real world too. So like the toy maker ends up bringing shit
into the big monkeys and stuff, right?
Yeah, big robot monkeys, and then all of their friends from the previous movies come and help them.
So let's talk about the real world side of things, right? You talked about it a little in the summary. So in Ready Player One, we talked about the rigs and setups that they have. In the film, there's a couple of dumb things about it. So there's a scene near the end where there's a big battle, and we see a whole bunch of people, right, who are involved in this battle. That's great.
In the streets.
But they're out, like, in the streets, and they're running around.
And they're, like, doing backflips and shit.
They're doing parkour.
It didn't even occur to me at that moment that, like, how physically fit everyone in this world must be for doing all of the, like, video game shit without consequence in the real world. But they're...
but that's the
they're
other
not, like, running into
maybe
anything.
they all need physical therapy later.
Like
maybe they're like
they're in the virtual space, right? Like they can only see what's happening in the virtual space.
Yeah.
But they're running around in the real world doing backflips and stuff, being the Ninja Turtles.
Like all the poor
and
people
it's a little
don't have
it's a little disconcerting. I'll be honest.
Because there's traffic.
Because there's cars and it's children.
Not to mention that pretty much the entire world of Ready Player One exists in Columbus, Ohio. Like, there's like 5 people all met each other in the Oasis, and it's like, oh, what are the odds that we're all live in Columbus? And is the big corporation.
Well, the two
Sho and Daito?
They're not from Columbus, Ohio. They took a plane.
Did they? I mean, I'm sure in the book that is clearly stated. It's implied at best that Sho, Daito, and what's her face? H.
Yes.
Weren't already there.
Okay, so
because it says that they came to meet up with them, but there was no mention of like fucking travel from other places.
Here's what I'll say. There was no mention of travel. There also was no mention of not travel.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really addressed, but I would say it's not heavily implied enough for my liking that they were from anywhere other than Columbus, Ohio.
What if there's Ready Player One, except you just play as a butterfly because that's all that's available to you?
So in the Matrix, they created a virtual reality space called the Oasis in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, and then... but then the twist to that is that the world of the Matrix actually is just a game that's in Game Over in Spy Kids 3D.
It's actually a mini game, which is weird.
It's a mini game.
It's really complex. So, Jeff, what I was going to ask is, why don't you talk to me a little about some of the more gamified elements of Spy Kids 3D Game Over, and then compare them to some of the stuff going on in Ready Player One.
There's a lot of like really exaggerated like video game things, like I said earlier, like everything is super planar, right, for a better word. You know, it's very like
flat,
kind of like
more like being in a Mario Kart game than like a first-person shooter.
Well, not even a Mario Kart. It's more like being in a fucking like Atari game, honestly.
Really?
Okay.
Or I haven't seen it recently, but I'll believe you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of that was intentional and how much of that was just...
There's not a lot of verticality
budget.
to the world.
Yeah, but there's, like, just a lot of, like, video game stuff, like, prancing around, right? Like, there's giant targets with fucking legs on them that are just, like, walking around. There's, like, frogs on pogo sticks, right? Like, there's a lot of, like, NPC stuff that exists in the world that makes it more of just, like, a, gamey thing, right? Like...
The virtual girlfriend moment.
Yeah. I don't remember how that ended, but
wasn't she like she was like a glitch in the game
or
something.
She was a glitch in the program, which somehow represented itself as an artificial intelligence of a 9-year-old girl.
I think she was like a 12-year-old girl. Junie's not that creepy.
No, Junie's 9 in the movie.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure they're both 9.
You think he's 9 in the third movie?
I'll look it up.
You think Junie Cortez, you think he's 9 in the third movie?
I'm pretty sure they said that out loud.
Well, when he's 12, he figures out he's in the Matrix, and then they keep resetting him.
The person who said that they were 9 in the movie was Gertie Giggles, who I'm pretty sure is supposed to be the same age as Junie.
All right, so he might be 9 in the third movie. But as I said, I'm going to keep this tone of voice as if I was correct.
I don't think the actor was 9 in the third movie, but...
He didn't look 9. He looked like a preteen.
I would guess preteen if I hadn't heard the number 9 with my ear holes about an hour ago.
Number 9.
What age is Junie Cortez in all of the Spy Kids movies?
The Wikipedia says that Junie was pulled out of retirement to rescue his sister.
Yeah, at the ripe old age of 9.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of like, wow, why did he retire?
Because
he's older than we are. Okay, he was born in 1992, which would make him 11 in 2003.
Well, there we go, preteen.
But 11 to 9 is not a huge jump for actors.
Well, I mean, at that, so because that's right around when people start to hit like puberty, so it is kind of a huge jump. Like it's a bigger jump than like 18 to 22 because you don't hit puberty when you're 19 years old.
It's a bigger jump than the jump from man to butterfly.
What was the impetus of this?
I
question?
have no idea. Well, the game type elements in it, and how well do you think those are done?
I think they're done pretty well. It's all pretty video gamey. There's giant robot battles. There's like big crazy races and shit like that.
Everything you'd want from a video game world that was supposed to be gamey.
Okay, Emily Osment, the character who plays
the
Gertie Googles,
was also
Googles. Sorry, the actor who plays Gary Googles was also born in 1992, making her also 11 in 2003. So I'm just saying, well, I mean, you know, puberty is different for boys and girls, but I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be the same age, and she says she's 9, so I rest my case.
Yeah,
for what it's worth.
That was all right. I agree.
Therefore, I win the gold star.
So let me check the
video game elements in Spy Kids. I think they're done pretty well. There's not like as many references as something, you know, like Ready Player One, or even like, you know, Scott Pilgrim has like a shit ton of not that that's a virtual reality movie, but like
I don't know that there needed to be.
Yeah, I mean the only reference I could think of offhand is like Junie says something about like Atari at some point as like an offhand joke, but that's the only like reference that there is. Otherwise, it's just like it's all pretty video game-y, but there's not a lot of like allusion to video game tropes or things like that like there is in Ready Player One. You know what I mean?
It's a less precise dialogue for a less precise audience.
That's very insightful.
Yeah.
So I want to ask, as we come to the end of this beautiful section here, I'm going to ask you both the same question, but I'm going to ask Jahnavi first. So how well do you think, or let's not say how well, let's give a real qualifier. How realistically would you say the virtual space in the Matrix is represented by the film? Does it feel like something that could exist as a virtual, like does it feel like a believable virtual space?
To me, not really. Just because the Matrix from a narrative perspective is not really focused on like the virtual reality aspect. It's more more focused on its like sort of like philosophical implications than it is on like what are the real world ramifications of like spending a lot of your time living in virtual reality, because its whole premise is like the real world, you know, isn't the real world. So I think that if we're talking about what depiction of virtual reality is the realist or the most accurate or sort of is engaged with in like a thoughtful narrative way, the Matrix is like using the idea of like a virtual reality in a completely different way, and it's not really depicting it as the same kind of thing as like something intentional of a virtual reality that's been constructed by people for people.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that's what I gotta say about that.
I think it's a really solid answer. Jeff, same question, except replace the word Matrix with Spy Kids 3D, game over.
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually, like, there are elements of it that I think are not realistic, like the fucking commandeering of his grandfather's body into the virtual world, I think is... And then, like, being able to maybe, like, do all the... Like, since they don't really say anything about, like, haptic shit or, like, show how that would work, I don't think that part is I mean, the concept seems like it could be realistic, but the way that they, like, you know, show it, I don't think is very realistic.
It's
but
a
in
little
terms of, like...
hand-wavy.
Yeah, in terms of what the world looks like, I think that,
itself,
like... Yeah, I think that it's actually a pretty realistic representation of like what that, you know, like what a version of a game that in a virtual reality system could look like, you know?
Yeah, like if you compare that to like the graphics of Job Simulator.
Right, yeah, like I mean, aside from like their avatars existing in like full high res and being able to see them as people, like the world around them is like, I don't know, it's pretty Half-Life, or not Half-Life, Second Life.
That's like Half-Life times 4.
Yeah, it basically is Half-Life 3. Like, this is what we've been looking for.
That's why Gabe would never announce Half-Life 3 because it already came out.
Because it was called Spy Kids 3D Spy Kids 3D Game Over.
Half-Life 3D Game Over. That's the title of this episode.
The Matrix Player 3D Game Over.
The plot continuation from the previous Half-Life games is subtle at best, but it's there for the really eagle-eyed viewers of Spy Kids 3D Game
Dreaming
Over.
Butterfly Simulator 3D Game Over.
Yeah.
Now with smell-o-vision.
Like the way that the world is set up, where there's like different sections that have like different, qualities to them, like a racing section and like a, on the moon there's a fucking giant robot battle arena. Like, I think that all makes sense in terms of like a virtual reality world. And I think that like, sometimes Ready Player One, it's perhaps, I mean, I guess it's different because it's evolved for a while, but like it's pretty ridiculously expansive for like what the game would be when it first came out, whereas Game Over, like, it's supposed to be like release day. So the aspects where it's like, where it seems like, oh, people are actually in the game is like ridiculous, obviously, but the
virtual world,
just the way that the world looks, I think makes sense.
So I'll say a brief thing and then turn it around on you guys, and then that'll be the end of the discussion. So for Ready Player One, obviously it takes place like further in the future, so that the technology is better.
Wow. A little spicier
than Spy Kids or than the Matrix.
But I feel like for that world, there are certain elements of it, like we talked about at the beginning, that are very realistic in its representation. Like the fact that you see all these, like characters from other media and stuff. Like you see Master Chief and the characters from Overwatch and stuff like that. Because people would want to dress up as those characters if they were playing.
Let's be real though. Like now, I think what you'd see is about like 90% Uganda Knuckles.
You'd see a lot of Uganda
like
Knuckles.
10%.
Yeah.
Well,
there'd be a lot. That's the unrealistic. That's the unrealistic aspect about it, is that there aren't nearly enough memes being represented.
Well, here's the thing, though. Maybe there are, and they're all just 2044 memes, so we don't get them.
That's true. That's true.
But
or like all the characters that you can't identify are from games that have not come out
exactly
yet.
Yeah.
Oh man, so like I don't know, there's a lot of like then Ready Player One, Kingdom Hearts parallels with all of this like pop culture mushy
well, Ready Player One
together.
is Kingdom Hearts 4.
I mean, I think that sounds too close to reality to not be true.
So I wanted to, real quick.
And we all know that Kingdom Hearts 4 is actually Half-Life 4.
Yeah, obviously. So, but real quick, so how did you guys feel? You gave the answers for your domains. The virtual space was represented. Same question, basically, but for Ready Player One.
I think that the way the virtual space was incorporated into the plot was good. Like, it was there to make a point. The journey that the character went through did make a point also. Just sort of about like, hey, don't repeat the mistakes of the past in trying to forge this new future where, okay, you can have nice things if you're a realist about it. So I think that, I guess it did pretty well. And as far as how the virtual space was represented, I do think that it's pretty close to like what that kind of communal immersive environment might be like. And the fact that it dovetails with this like overpopulation issue is interesting. And I think that it sort of it put that twist on what I would call at this point, like a classic, like escapist narrative.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty cool.
And Jeffrey?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the only thing I'd really have to add to that is that, like, I think from like speaking visually, I think that it was a little bit less varied than I might expect. Like, I think that a lot of the world was pretty dark visually overall, whereas I feel like there'd be a lot more with infinite possibilities in terms of what things looked like. I think that there probably would be a lot more variety in like the atmospheres that existed. Whereas I think what was shown in the movie was like kind of very few things. It was like a Tron-y sort of city setting, and then like the mountainous setting, and then the like lava world setting.
I agree.
I feel like there'd be a bit more.
The environments, except for the ones that specifically were like action set pieces in the film, weren't as nearly as detailed as they would or should have been.
Yeah, do you think that was like sort of an intentional choice though, based on like what would people of this time and place be envisioning as their environment, because their like imagination was limited due to their environment? Or do you think that that's not valid because there would have been enough knowledge of the way things were before to have more to sort of jump off of? Or do you think it would be a limitation of the Ready Player One thing?
Yeah, I sort of think that like imagination is not something that was like in the world of Ready Player One, it sort of seems like there's kind of a surplus of imagination, and then that was like, you know, everyone was escaping to this world and doing all these fantastical things, and that was part of the problem, right? So I don't think that I think that like them living in this virtual world for a long time would mean that there was probably more. It would probably be a little bit less gimmicky than something like Spike of the 3D, since like, you know, it is a world that they pretty much live in, right? Yeah. So like things not being visually accosting makes sense, but I just think that there'd be
more
like
detail.
More fantastical environments of like, you know, Avatar-esque like Pandora planets with all these like pretty lights and shit, you know, like a lot of more visually appealing things because they have the choice to do that, you know?
Wait. So can people make the environments? Because I had the impression that the environments were like pre-created and then people can choose.
Well, they were pre-created, but I mean,
by
like
the game developers. As far as we're told, it's like a huge world, so there's also possible that some of it is like generated. But definitely a bunch of it is like created intentionally by developers.
I'm just assuming that developers would have like would add a larger variety of different places, and then
that's probably fair.
And
or maybe
and I you know, I think the criticism is fair. We're not shown that in the film, whether or not it could or does exist in the world. We're not shown it.
We just don't know.
Guys, that was a great discussion.
Columbus, Ohio is just a dark place.
All right, well, that is going to draw our thoughtful, deep, meaningful, philosophical, butterflyful, virtual discussion.
It didn't really happen.
You were not really listening to a podcast.
No,
podcasts are only real in the Matrix.
if you're hearing this right now, you're in the Matrix. Anyway,
did you know that Matrix means womb in Latin?
Holy shit! Because they're in those like pods and they're curled up in fetal positions. That's pretty crazy. So I want to thank you both for such a lovely discussion. Now we move on to our ratings, and we're going to begin by having each of our representatives, Jeffrey and Jahnavi, rate the topic on a scale from 1 to 5 butterflies.
That tracks.
Okay.
Checks out.
Jeffrey, why don't you go ahead and rate? So what I'm going to have you rate is not the film Ready Player One, but instead it's Virtual World.
I've got so many things to say.
Listen, this is not a Ready Player One episode. This is a virtual reality episode.
But we already talked about how we felt about the virtual world. We just did it.
All right, Jeffrey, I'm going to have you rate the film Ready Player One.
Thank you.
On a scale from 1 to 5 butterflies.
Yeah, it was a fun movie. I think overall I'm going to go with 3 butterflies, maybe lean on like the 2.5 direction. The film was not without its merit. There were definitely like enjoyable parts, especially if you like Spike It's 3D, you could just put aside like some of the cornier aspects of it. But there was a lot of like sort of narrative inconvenience that I found to be either unrealistic or taking me out of it a little bit. I got pretty hardcore pissed off when the main girl was just like, oh, you'd be disappointed what I look like on the real world, and then she was just like this attractive girl with a cool looking scar. Like, I don't think it was a scar. I think it
was like a birthmark.
So much. Yeah, it wasn't even a scar. It was a birthmark. but it was cool looking, and it's like, even if it weren't, like, how fucking shallow are you, or how shallow do you think everyone in the world is? Like, what kind of treatment have you? I don't know. That whole trope of like people in the movies being like, I'm hideous, and like still looking pretty good because they want the actors to still look good pisses me off like pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
So, or
like how, oh, I'm the unattractive outsider, but really they're just brunette and everyone else is blonde, and that's just how like they're still both very attractive. So
right. So
I get it.
I fucking watched Shrek the other day, and it just filled my heart with hope that, you know, that doesn't always have to be a thing, because Shrek was above its fucking time. But
Shrek is a great movie. So, Jahnavi, go ahead and give us your rating.
That's how I feel.
Ready Player One, 1 to 5 butterflies.
You know, I'm gonna give it a solid 3 butterflies. Ready Player One was fine. Like, there was nothing in it that I found particularly, like, insightful or surprising, given the media landscape it was, like, entering. I can't say that it told me anything new or had a new point to make, but it was just kind of fine. But I will say that I enjoyed, like, reading the book when I first read the book. I think that it does a better job of kind of telling the story. And the only point of having it be in the movie is if you were going to make the virtual world, like, even more vibrant and spectacular, which, I mean, from our discussion, they didn't exactly do. They kind of, like, did okay at
it's
it.
pretty...
it was a serviceable virtual world.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think Ready Player One is overall an okay film. I'd probably put it a little above average, but not much higher than that. If you haven't read the book, I know you have, Jahnavi. I don't know if you have, Jeffrey, and I don't know if you have, dear listener. But if you haven't read the book, I'd recommend check that out. It's very good. It's a good book, and if the themes and, you know, plot and stuff of Ready Player One sounded interesting from what we discussed, it's done very well in the book, and the movie does it okay. So
I really liked Halliday as a character and the way he was
in the movie. That was good. The big battle at the end I thought was super cool.
Yeah, I like seeing a Gundam and Iron Giant and their version of Mechagodzilla.
Yeah, it was dope.
Because they're like, here's what Mechagodzilla looks like and what we recognize him to look like. And I'm like, that's not a guy in a dumb-looking suit. I've never seen this version before.
All right, so next I will award the Gold Star Student Award to the person who I think did the mostest, bestest contributions in this episode. It's very subjective, honestly. But the Gold Star today is going to be the Golden VR headset. And it's going to be a tough one because you both did super duper good. You did words good.
We banced the good.
But I'm gonna have to award the Golden VR goggles to El Jefe, Jeffrey Leavitt, because I felt like there were a lot of really...
Can they be the Spy Kids ones now?
They can be the Spy Kids ones, yeah. I felt like there were some really strong connections between Spy Kids 3D Game Over and Ready Player One's virtual worlds that I did not anticipate coming into this. So you came with the fire, and you didn't let me down. Jahnavi, you also didn't let me down. I love The Matrix, one of my favorite movies. You both did good. It was really hard to choose.
Thank you.
Do you want to give
I'm gonna use them to go into Game Over and just live there.
Yeah, go live there, hang out with Elijah Wood.
Perhaps long enough that I will forget.
Yeah,
I will forget that is in fact not the real world. If you find like a girl in there who's your age and you think she's kind of cute, just ask for her ID because she might actually be like 3 years younger than you thought. And she might be
she
a
also
glitch,
may
too.
be a glitch, yeah, not a real girl.
That's meant to
So if you're like, look, another 24-year-old, but then actually, maybe she's...
So like, was Elijah Wood also a computer
No, he
program?
was...
That part's a little bit unclear.
I think Elijah Wood was a person playing the game.
But how did he get to be the guy on the poster if no one had played the game before it came out?
I think
he was like an alpha tester or something?
So I think he... Okay, so what I'm assuming is that, like, that armor that he got is like a super high level, maybe unique piece of gear. And because of all his skill and mastery, he was able to get it. And that's how he becomes the guy.
I don't think he became the guy. I think he is the guy.
I'm the guy. Anyway, that is a mystery for the Spy Kids trilogy episode of the podcast.
Oh, that's fucking coming. You know it.
All right, so I am...
Wait. No, there was another Spy Kids movie. It was called All the Time in the World.
You know what? I think there was a glitch in the Matrix because I couldn't hear a word you said.
I just said that the fourth Spy Kids movie was called All the Time in
the
World.
You know what happened again? Weird.
Yeah.
I think he's making a joke about not acknowledging the fourth Spy Kids movie.
It just happened to Jeff, too.
I thought that the joke was about the butterfly thing.
The butterfly thing.
Again.
Anyway, listen,
never mind.
guys,
it was deja vu.
Deja vu. This has been a great podcast. And everyone agrees. So I'm going to do the outro read now. Good luck in the editing process because of how I have run through this script. That about wraps it up. Thank you for listening to the Common Geeking Program. I've been your host, Edward Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at FakeEddyRyan or on twitch.tv/SiegeMaximo. Again, I've been joined by...
Transformers reference. Hi, I've been Jeff, and probably will continue to be. I'm sure someone's made that joke, probably Austin. You can find me on Instagram at Things I Wish Existed. I actually post stuff there now with sometimes regularity.
Nice.
I post about the art things.
Aww.
And I don't really exist much elsewhere, except in the Matrix, because that's where we all exist.
And I am Jahnavi. I am on Twitter at JKIR1. I don't really tweet a lot, but I'm there. You can see me there if you want.
Jahnavi's like, I don't tweet often, but when I do,
it's fire.
They're pretty good. It's Dos Equis.
I think that guy has better facial hair than me, but I mean, I'll take it.
That's true. I will not.
All right.
Deny
well,
that
dear listener, it's been lovely having you stop by. Be sure to tune in 2 weeks from now, Friday, July 5th, for our next episode, and that's going to be hosted by Jahnavi. Jahnavi, why don't you tell them what the episode's going to be about?
This is where we leave these things.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. Make sure you're here for that. I know I will be. Anyways, thank you for listening, subscribing, sharing, everything that you do for us, dear listener. And I'll see you next week. Well, I probably won't. I will not. But we will see you next week. And we'll see you next episode.
This episode of the Common Geeking Program was hosted by Eddy, joined by the representatives Jeff and Jahnavi. This episode is sponsored by Half-Life 3. That's right, I said it, it's happening, it's confirmed, and do not tell me otherwise. The podcast is created and produced by Colin Ketchen and Jeff Leavitt, with this episode edited by myself, Matt Canavan, and containing original music by Colin Ketchen. We'd love for you to stay engaged with us at Geeking Program or #CGP. Reviews on Apple Podcasts are also a critical help for helping grow the show, and we'll read new reviews on the air. If you want to know more about us and all our works, head to commongeekingprogram.com. Stay in touch, stay tuned, and thank you for listening to this.
We'll see you next week. It says next week at the end of the thing, and that's...
I know it does. He doesn't proofread. It's okay. He is against proofreading as a concept.
All right.
He said that to me.
And we'll see you next episode.